In the autumn of 1883, a cold chill swept through Massachusetts, biting through Jonathan Moorfield's coat as he traveled along a winding road. The carriage creaked as it moved, its wheels crunching over dry leaves. The sky, heavy with clouds, seemed to foreshadow something dark. Jonathan, now 35, looked worn beyond his years, his face marked by the recent scandals that had shattered his life in Boston. Once a respected lawyer, he had lost everything: his reputation, his clients, and his wealth, after accusations of fraud and bankruptcy. As the carriage approached the Moorfield mansion, a large, imposing Victorian house built by his great-great-grandfather in 1790, Jonathan's heart sank. The mansion stood like a dark silhouette on a hill, with broken windows that seemed to watch him. The coachman, an elderly man with a grim face, stopped the carriage and handed Jonathan the keys to the mansion, explaining they had been left by the lawyer managing the property, Thaddeus Green. He warned Jonathan that the townspeople spoke of the house in hushed tones, mentioning that no one from the Moorfield family had ever had a peaceful end. With a prayer for his safety, the coachman left. Jonathan stood alone before the mansion, the iron gate creaking as he pushed it open. The path was overgrown with weeds, and the house loomed like a forgotten relic. Inside, the mansion was just as abandoned and decaying as it looked from the outside. Dust hung in the air, and broken furniture sat covered in white sheets. Portraits of his ancestors stared down at him with stern, unblinking eyes. Jonathan lit a lamp and began exploring, finding a kitchen stocked with basic supplies left by the lawyer. When he noticed a door slightly open beneath the main staircase, curiosity led him to a narrow staircase descending to the basement. As he approached, a loud noise from upstairs startled him, but when he called out, there was only silence. Climbing the stairs carefully, Jonathan entered a room that seemed to have once been the master bedroom. There, he found a stack of diaries, one of which was written by his great-great-grandfather Elijah Moorfield, dating back to 1795. The diary contained disturbing entries about Elijah's growing paranoia and visions of strange shadows and voices. There were mentions of a curse tied to the house and something terrifying hidden in the basement. Next to the diary was a letter from Thaddeus Green, warning Jonathan about the mansion's dark history. He suggested reading the diaries and reviewing medical records that might shed light on the curse before making any decisions. As Jonathan continued his search, he found medical records detailing the mental decline of his ancestors, including Elijah, his great-grandfather Jeremiah, and his father William. They had all suffered from similar symptoms: paranoia, violent outbursts, and delusions. The reports suggested that the family's descent into madness seemed tied to the mansion itself. Feeling unsettled, Jonathan moved to another room, where he found a portrait of his father. As he adjusted the painting, he noticed a hidden door behind it. It led to a small, secret office. Inside, he found more diaries, this time from his father, William. One entry from 1865, shortly before William's death, described his increasing obsession with the mansion's basement and a strange black stone that seemed to draw him in. Determined to uncover the truth, Jonathan made his way down to the basement, where he found an altar surrounded by dark symbols and a stone that seemed to absorb the light from his lamp. The air was thick and cold, carrying the scent of earth and something metallic. As he examined the stone, a gust of wind extinguished his lamp, plunging him into darkness. In that moment, he heard a voice whisper, "Welcome back, Moorfield. We've been waiting for you." Panicked, Jonathan scrambled back up the stairs, barely escaping the basement's grip. He locked the door behind him, heart racing. As night fell, Jonathan realized that the mansion was far more than just a family inheritance. It was a place steeped in mystery and danger, and it seemed as if it had been waiting for him to return. The mansion was eerily quiet once more, but this time, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. That night, locked in his room with a chair wedged against the door, the footsteps began again, closer, more distinct. As exhaustion finally claimed him, he drifted into a troubled sleep, plagued by visions of his ancestors gathered around the basement altar, their faces twisted in a mix of ecstasy and terror as they offered their blood to the black stone. The next morning, a thick fog hung over the Moorfield estate, blanketing the area in an unsettling haze. Jonathan woke with sore muscles and a restless mind, the events of the previous night still lingering in the back of his thoughts. After a quick breakfast, he decided to leave the mansion behind and venture into Blackwood, hoping to find answers in the nearby town. The 40-minute walk was solitary and uneasy, the fog slowly lifting to reveal the autumn landscape, yet Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Blackwood was a typical New England town with quaint wooden houses, a white church with a tall spire, and a central square where the main businesses were located. As Jonathan stepped into the local grocery store, conversation stopped. All eyes turned toward him. "Good morning," Jonathan greeted them, trying to sound calm. "I'm Jonathan Moorfield. I've recently inherited the property on the outskirts of town." The man behind the counter, a stocky man with gray hair, responded quickly. "Moorfield? It's been a long time since we've seen a Moorfield here, since the incident with your father," he added, his tone darkening. Jonathan felt a lump in his throat. "That's what I'd like to learn more about. I found some diaries and papers in the mansion, but there's still so much I don't understand about my family's history." A heavy silence filled the room. Finally, the man spoke again. "I'm Harold Simmons. I knew your father and your grandfather. You look like them. I need to know what happened to my family. Why does everyone in Blackwood fear the Moorfield name?" Jonathan asked, his voice a mix of frustration and confusion. Harold exchanged uneasy glances with the others in the store. Some shook their heads, while others looked away. After a pause, Harold said, "Come with me. This isn't a conversation for the public." Jonathan followed Harold into the back office of the store, where Harold closed the door and gestured for Jonathan to sit. "The Moorfields have been here since 1790, Harold began, settling into his chair. Elijah Moorfield was an ambitious man. He came from Boston with big plans and bought the land from the natives for practically nothing, ignoring their warnings." "What warnings?" Jonathan asked, recalling the notes in his father's diaries. "The Wampanoag called it the land of hungry spirits," Harold explained. "They said it was a gateway to another world, a place where ancient things slumbered beneath the earth." Jonathan felt a chill. "Is this about the black stone?" Harold looked surprised. "So, you know about it. Some say it's a meteorite, others think it's a native artifact. What we do know is that every Moorfield man who stayed at that mansion long enough ended up the same way, driven to madness, committing terrible acts of violence." Harold handed Jonathan a yellowed newspaper clipping. It detailed how Jonathan's father, William Moorfield, had murdered 2 servants before hanging himself in the attic in 1865. The report also mentioned strange bloodstained symbols found on the walls, alongside an incoherent diary describing communications with entities from the other side. "My mother never told me any of this," Jonathan murmured, feeling sick. "She said he died from a sudden illness." "She wanted to protect you," Harold replied gently. "After the funeral, she swore she would never return to that house." Harold paused, his eyes filled with concern. "Many thought the curse ended with your family leaving. But now you've returned." Jonathan nodded grimly. "Yes." Harold leaned forward. "And I have to ask, have you noticed anything strange since you arrived? Heard voices? Seen things that shouldn't be there?" Jonathan hesitated, then admitted, "I heard voices last night, and saw things that shouldn't be there." Harold looked serious. "The curse follows a pattern. It starts with little things, strange sounds, objects out of place. Then, it moves to the voices calling from the basement. If it's already begun, you need to leave the mansion. Immediately." "I can't just leave," Jonathan protested. "It's all I have left." Harold's expression darkened. "Your inheritance includes more than that mansion. It includes the fate of your ancestors." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. A young woman entered, her brown hair tied in a neat bun, glasses perched on her nose. "Father, Dr. Blackwood is here to pick up his order," she said, then noticed Jonathan. "Oh, I didn't know you were with someone." "This is Jonathan Moorfield," Harold introduced. "Jonathan, this is my daughter, Ella. Ellenina's eyes widened as she looked at Jonathan. "Moorfield?" she asked. "From the Moorfield mansion?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes, that's right. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said, shaking her hand. Elenina works at the town library, Harold explained. She knows more about local history than anyone else in Blackwood. Actually, Elenina said, I've been researching the Moorfield family for my thesis on behavior patterns in isolated families in New England. Jonathan felt a spark of hope. Maybe you can help me. I need to understand what happened to my ancestors. I'd be happy to share my findings, Elenina replied. I can meet you at the library this afternoon if you'd like. That would be extremely helpful, Jonathan said, grateful for her willingness to help. After bidding Harold goodbye, Jonathan spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies for the mansion: food, candles, kerosene for the lamps, and even a revolver for protection. At 2 p.m., he met Elenina at the Blackwood Municipal Library, a red brick building with tall windows and shelves full of old leather-bound books. She led him to a back study room where she had laid out several books, documents, and photographs. I started researching your family 3 years ago, Elenina explained, adjusting her glasses. At first, it was part of a broader study on hereditary mental illnesses. But I soon realized that the Moorfield case was unique. In what way? Jonathan asked, examining the materials on the table. The consistency of the symptoms and the age at which they manifest is statistically improbable, Elenina said. Normally, hereditary mental illnesses vary greatly across generations, but with the Moorfields, it's as if the same illness is repeating itself exactly the same way, generation after generation. Elenina showed him a timeline of the Moorfield family's decline, from Elijah to William. And there's another strange factor, she added. It only affects Moorfield men who stay in the mansion for long periods of time. Those who left, like your great-uncle Thomas, lived normal lives. Jonathan's stomach twisted. So, you believe there's something in the mansion that causes this? It's a theory I can't dismiss, Elenina admitted. I first thought it could be environmental, maybe water contaminated with mercury or another toxin, but tests after your father's death found nothing unusual. She hesitated. What else? Jonathan asked. There are reports from former staff and neighbors about strange occurrences in the mansion. Unexplained sounds. Shadows moving in ways they shouldn't. And this, she said, showing Jonathan an old photograph of the mansion from 1860. Look at the attic window. Jonathan's blood ran cold. In the window, clearly visible, was a pale figure, watching the photographer. It looked disturbingly like him. Is this my grandfather? He asked, barely above a whisper. Elenina shook her head. Your grandfather was in Boston at that time. The mansion should have been empty. Jonathan's hands trembled as he returned the photograph. What do you think is happening at the Moorfield mansion? He asked her. Elenina took a deep breath. As an academic, I can only work with what's verifiable. But as someone who's researched Blackwood's history, I believe there's something in that mansion, something beyond our understanding. Something affecting the minds of your ancestors in a way that modern science can't explain. Jonathan felt the weight of her words. The stone in the basement. Elenina's eyes widened. You found it. It's black, and it feels alive, Jonathan explained. Elenina quickly made more notes. There are mentions of it in the diaries, but I've never found anyone who could describe it. Miss Simmons, Jonathan said, leaning forward, is there anyone who broke the cycle? Anyone who faced the symptoms and survived? Elenina flipped through her notes. There's one case, your great-granduncle James Moorfield. He started showing symptoms in 1837. But unlike the others, he sought help, not medical help, but spiritual help. Spiritual? Jonathan asked, intrigued. He consulted a Wampanoag woman named Sarah Pequot, a healer with ancestral knowledge, Elenina explained. He left the mansion for 3 months, and when he returned, he was completely transformed. He lived to be 67 without another episode of mental instability. But he never documented what she did for him? Jonathan asked, leaning forward. No, unfortunately, Elenina replied. She died in 1845. But there are rumors about her great-granddaughter, Ruth Pequot. She lives on the Wampanoag Reservation, about 20 miles from here. Jonathan's heart lifted. I need to find her. Elenina's expression grew serious. Mr. Moorfield, before you go any further, I must ask, are you already experiencing the symptoms? Jonathan hesitated, then nodded. I've heard voices, seen things that shouldn't be there. Elenina's face softened with concern. Then it's already begun. Faster than I feared. What does that mean? Jonathan asked, his voice shaking. It means that whatever is in that mansion is growing stronger, she said quietly. And it's not going to let you go easily. Elenina quickly packed up her notes, looking worried. Mr. Moorfield, I don't think it's safe for you to go back to the mansion tonight. Jonathan replied firmly, I have no choice. All my belongings are there, and I don't have money for lodging. Then let me come with you, Elenina suggested. As a researcher, I have a professional interest in this phenomenon, and as a person, I'm concerned for your safety. Surprised, Jonathan hesitated. Miss Simmons, I can't let you put yourself in danger. I won't be in danger, she assured him. According to all accounts, only Moorfield men are directly affected. Besides, I'm the most informed person about your family's history outside of your lineage. I can help you make sense of the rest of the diaries. After a pause, Jonathan nodded. All right, thank you. As they left the library, the sky was turning dark, casting long shadows across the streets of Blackwood. Elenina stopped at her house for a moment to gather some things and let her father know her plans, returning with a small suitcase and a look of determination. The journey back to the mansion was silent, the thick forest around them seeming to close in as twilight deepened. Twisted branches stretched out like skeletal fingers reaching for the red sky. When the silhouette of the Moorfield mansion finally appeared on the horizon, Elenina let out a small gasp. What is it? Jonathan asked. For a second, I thought I saw lights in the third-floor windows, she said, squinting. But it must be the reflection of the setting sun. Jonathan didn't respond, but he too had seen the lights, and he knew they weren't reflections. Once inside the mansion, Jonathan lit several lamps to fend off the oppressive darkness. Elenina, with her keen eyes, took notes as she examined the grand but decaying space. Impressive architecture, she commented, inspecting the elaborate carvings on the main staircase railing. It's typical of the late colonial period, but with Gothic elements that are unusual for this region. My great-great-grandfather hired a European architect, Jonathan explained, remembering the details from the diaries. Someone who worked on castles in Transylvania, if I'm not mistaken. Elenina raised an eyebrow. An interesting choice. They made their way to the library on the first floor, where Jonathan lit a fire in the hearth to ward off the cold. As the flames crackled, he poured 2 glasses of the whiskey he had found in the kitchen. I suggest we review the remaining diaries tonight, Elenina proposed, accepting the glass. The more we know about the pattern of the affliction, the better prepared we'll be. Jonathan agreed, gathering the pile of diaries he had collected from the master bedroom and the secret office. They began reading them carefully, starting with the oldest volumes. Hours passed as they uncovered the disturbing patterns in the minds of the Moorfield men. The diaries revealed a consistent sequence: hearing voices, followed by visions of shadows on the walls, an obsession with the basement and the black stone, and finally, violent outbursts, usually directed at family members. There's something here I don't understand, Elenina said, frowning as she read through one of Jeremiah Moorfield's diaries. He repeatedly mentions a blood ritual that would strengthen his connection to what he calls the ancients. My father mentions this too, Jonathan replied, flipping through his father's diary. He talks about offering blood to the stone to feed the bond. Elenina quickly made notes. It seems they believed they were in communication with some kind of entity through the stone, and blood served as a conductor. Suddenly, a loud crash from upstairs startled them both. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed above them, moving from one side of the house to the other. Is there anyone else in the house? Elenina whispered, eyes wide. There shouldn't be, Jonathan answered, reaching for the revolver he had bought earlier. They cautiously climbed the stairs, Jonathan leading with the lamp in one hand and the gun in the other. The footsteps had stopped, but now they could hear something else, a dragging sound, like furniture being moved. The noise was coming from the master bedroom. Jonathan was sure he had left the door open, but it was now shut tight. When he tried the handle, it was locked. "This is impossible," he muttered. "There's no key for this door." From inside the room, they heard a voice, low and hoarse, speaking in a language neither of them recognized. Jonathan's blood ran cold. The voice sounded exactly like the one he had heard in the basement the night before. "Jonathan," Elalina whispered, pointing to the gap under the door. A dark, thick substance was slowly oozing into the hallway. The metallic smell of blood filled the air. "We need to get out of here," Jonathan said urgently, pulling Elalina by the arm. But just then, the door flew open with a violent force. Inside, the room was pitch black, but in the darkness, something moved. A tall, skeletal figure, with limbs too long to be human, stepped forward. Jonathan raised the revolver, but before he could fire, Elalina grabbed his arm. "No," she shouted. "That's what it wants, violence, blood." The creature stepped into the light, and Jonathan froze. Its face was a twisted, decayed version of his own, eyes hollow and black, its mouth stretched into an impossible grin. "Run!" Jonathan shouted, shoving Elalina toward the stairs. They bolted down the steps, hearing the creature's rapid pursuit behind them. When they reached the entrance hall, Jonathan tried to open the main door, but it was locked too. "This way," Elalina said, grabbing him and pulling him toward the library. Inside, Elalina quickly shoved a heavy bookshelf against the door while Jonathan scrambled to find another exit. "The windows," he said, rushing to the nearest one. But when he tried to open it, he found it sealed. No locks, no nails, as if the wood and glass had fused together. On the other side of the door, they heard the creature's claws scraping against the wood. "Jonathan Moorfield," the voice called, now perfectly clear. "Your blood belongs to the ancients. The lineage must continue the pact." "What pact?" Jonathan shouted, desperate. "What do you want from me?" "The same thing we wanted from your father and from his father before him," the voice replied, now a chorus of multiple voices speaking in unison. "A host, a portal, a sacrifice." Elalina tugged Jonathan away from the door. "That's it," she whispered urgently. "The diaries, the medical reports, it's not a hereditary mental illness. It's some kind of possession. This is madness." Jonathan protested, though deep down he knew there was no rational explanation for what was happening. "The stone in the basement," Elalina continued. "It's some kind of artifact, a connection point between our world and another. And for some reason, it has an affinity with Moorfield blood." "The basement," Jonathan said, his voice shaking. "We have to go to the basement?" "It's the source of all this," Elalina said firmly. "If we want to end the curse, we have to face its origin." The bookshelf began to slide aside, pushed by an unseen force. They had no choice. "There's an entrance to the basement through the kitchen pantry," Jonathan remembered. "Let's go." They rushed through the dining room to the kitchen, hearing the bookshelf fall behind them. In the pantry, Jonathan revealed a dusty trapdoor. "Quickly," Elalina urged as the creature's shadow loomed over them. Jonathan opened the trapdoor, helped Elalina down and followed, closing it behind them. In the pitch-black tunnel, Jonathan lit a match, revealing a narrow stone corridor. "This must be a service tunnel," Elalina whispered. "It probably leads to the main basement." They cautiously moved forward, Jonathan's match lighting only a few steps ahead. The air was thick and damp, heavy with decay. After what felt like an eternity, they entered the chamber Jonathan had seen the night before, where the black stone rested. "Should we continue?" Jonathan asked, unsure. Elalina nodded. "We have no choice. The creature will find us." They entered the altar room, where the stone pulsed with a dull glow, absorbing the light around it. "It's incredible," Elalina murmured, approaching it cautiously. Before Jonathan could respond, the trapdoor splintered under the creature's weight. "We don't have much time," Elalina said. "Did the diaries mention any way to stop this?" Jonathan searched his memory. "James, my great-granduncle, wrote about a purification ritual. He said Sarah Pequot taught him how to break the bond." "Do you remember the details?" Elalina asked, desperate. Something about blood freely given, not taken by force, Jonathan said. And an incantation in a language I didn't understand. That doesn't help us much, Elenina said. As the creature's claws grew louder, Elenina looked at the stone. Maybe we don't need the incantation. If the stone responds to Moorfield blood, and if intention is important. Jonathan realized her meaning. What are you suggesting? The diaries say your ancestors offered blood to strengthen the bond. What if you offered your blood to break it? Jonathan stepped forward, pulling out a pocket knife. It's worth a try, he said. He cut his palm and let his blood drip onto the stone, saying, I, Jonathan Moorfield, offer my blood not to strengthen, but to break the pact made by Elijah Moorfield. I release my lineage from this curse. Pain shot through his body as the stone began to pulse rapidly. A low hum escalated to a shrill scream. The creature appeared at the entrance, convulsing with rage but stopped as if blocked by an invisible force. The stone cracked under Jonathan's hand. The creature shrieked and dissolved into shadows, drawn into the stone. It's working! Elenina shouted over the noise. Jonathan's pain intensified as the stone pulled his blood and life force. His vision blurred, and his legs weakened. Jonathan! Elenina's voice seemed distant. Don't give up. With his remaining strength, Jonathan pressed harder on the stone. The stone cracked completely, and a flash of black light erupted from it, throwing Jonathan and Elenina against the walls. Then silence. Jonathan opened his eyes, every inch of his body aching. Elenina was beside him, covered in dust and blood but with a look of relief. You did it, she said softly. They looked at the altar, now empty except for fragments of the stone. Is it over? Jonathan asked. I believe so, Elenina replied. The creature disappeared when the stone broke. Jonathan examined his hand. The cut had slowed in bleeding, but the black stain was spreading beneath his skin. This doesn't look good, he murmured. Elenina tore a piece of her petticoat to bandage his hand. We need to get you to a doctor at dawn. They climbed the stairs to the entrance hall. The mansion felt different now, still decaying but lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. Do you think the curse is really over? Jonathan asked, settling into an armchair. Elenina looked thoughtful. I hope so. But it's hard to say. Ruth had been waiting for them. The next day, Jonathan and Elenina left the mansion, the black stain now mostly covering his arm. They arrived at Ruth's cabin, where she greeted them, knowing who Jonathan was the moment she saw him. Ruth treated him with care, confirming that Jonathan's blood had connected him to the ancients. The ancients are attempting to use your body as their doorway, Ruth explained. But we can stop them with a ritual. Ruth explained the ritual's cost. The Moorfield lineage would end with Jonathan. He would be unable to have children, the ultimate price to sever the connection. I accept the price, Jonathan said firmly. Ruth completed the ritual, asking for Jonathan's blood freely given. The fire flared as Ruth chanted, her voice and the drum creating an unbearable atmosphere of dread. Jonathan felt his consciousness slip as the voices of the ancients tried to take him, but he held firm. Jonathan shattered the stone, breaking the curse. He burned the diaries, sold the mansion, and left Blackwood with hope.